When you begin to solve your values problems, you now begin to solve all your other problems. They're like, I'm worried about my financials. I'm like, you can't fix your financials because you haven't fixed your values. You have the wrong people with the wrong behaviors, and that's why you're not making money.
Welcome to the Creator COO, the show where we surface the operators behind your favorite content and creators. I'm your host, Matt Estes.
This week's episode is the part 2 of my conversation with Gretchen Leslie. Gretchen is the president of Ramit Sethi's business called I Will Teach You to Be Rich, and the founder of The Wolf & Company, which is a fractional COO service that specializes in helping creators increase their profits. In the second half of our conversation, we dive into the most crucial part of any company, its culture. We also explore how to manage creative people and give feedback that actually helps people to work at their best. And we discuss the essential skills to look for in an exceptional creator COO. So if you missed part 1, go back and check it out. Otherwise, get yourself comfortable for part 2 of my conversation with Gretchen Leslie. Let's talk about culture a little bit, because I know you've got some interesting insights on this. You've mentioned in the past, I think that, and you talk about this in your operating manual, by the way, sort of your upfront business diagnostics, that a lot of times you step into companies and the culture is just, I think your exact words are the culture is trash.
It is my number. That's a little hyperbolic probably, but it is the number one problem that I find. And it is the hardest sell to get people to pay attention to.
How do you diagnose when culture is off, and how do you fix it?
Diagnosing it is easy. I can tell you within the first 2 hours of looking into your company if you have a culture problem. And there's all kinds of red flags.
Yeah. What do you notice right away?
So I ask for, when I do a diagnostic, I ask, obviously with an NDA, but I ask my clients to give me access to as much as they possibly can. I want to see their financials. But I want them to put me in their communication channels. I want to see your emails. I want to see your Slack or whatever else you're using, or your Basecamp. So one of the things that we will immediately look for is, how do you all talk to each other? The biggest question, how do decisions get made? Mm-hmm. And I'll give you an example. One founder that I worked with is one of my favorite clients, and she's amazing. When we started, she was like, I always ask my founders, like, what are some of the pain points? Like, as we begin this work together, what are some things that frustrate you that you want to solve? And she was like, it drives me insane that every decision in this company takes forever. It doesn't matter how small or how big, it takes forever to make a decision. Yep. And everybody in the company has to be involved. And so as we begin to audit, you can immediately see it. I think they were doing a live event, and it was a question about t-shirts.
Okay.
So, I'm watching the progression of this question. Should we get yellow t-shirts or red? Well, person 2 is like, well, we did red 2 years ago. And somebody else is like, well, I don't think yellow or red is good. Somebody else is like, well, it would match our brand colors if we did blue. There are 9 people talking about the color of the t-shirts. And they finally punt it to the founder to make her decide what color t-shirts are we having at this live event that has like 20 people. And it takes like 3 days.
I want to come back to like decision-making science, because that in and of itself is such a deep topic. And I have a sense you've got some thoughts on it, but this
aligns to her values, because one of their values was, so as I dig in, I'm like, your values, as they're stated, are, we're collaborative. And I'm like, that's real. I was like, this is real collaborative. They're being extremely collaborative. Is that working for you? And she was like, no, I hate it. She's like, what I really want is people to quickly and independently make decisions. And I said, you could say they're overly collaborative. You don't actually. And I was like, so as we dig in, what we find is like, people picked their values because they sounded good. They would look good on a poster in the break room. Everybody says collaboration is good. We should be collaborative. But what I find is either the way that they're actually living, the founder lives, talks, and acts, doesn't match. So there's dissonance. Okay. People are mad.
There's incongruence between how the actual founder is and the quote unquote stated corporate values.
Right. And now you have a toxic culture because people know bullshit when they hear it. And they're like, you act this way and you tell me to act this way. Like
Yeah.
now I don't believe anything you say now because this is trash. Or the founder has aspirational values. Like, I want
But
us
they're
to act
not,
this way.
they want to be that way, but they're not quite
Right.
meeting
But I
them.
didn't hire these people. These people are completely different.
I see.
So the way that, and I'm like, if you want to get me on a soapbox, get me started on values. So basically, here's how I would explain values.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a parent or a member of a family, you treat members of your family a certain way, and that's how they treat you back. You didn't write it on a poster. You didn't craft them in. You didn't give them bullet points. You didn't sit down and go, hey guys, here's what I believe and how I should treat you.
Yeah.
But you know what behaviors you want from other members of your family. And therefore, you know how you should treat them to get that. Your company operates the same way. What behaviors do you want out of the people in your company? That's how you have to treat them. And you should write them down because now that's how you want them to treat each other.
I like the Netflix Reed Hastings lens on values.
Yeah.
Have you ever read their culture deck?
Yeah, that's actually one of the ones I give to my founders, and I'm like, read this.
I love it. I think it's so good. He says something, I'm paraphrasing, but something to the effect that your values aren't a thing that you put on a sign and hang in a break room. Your values they're embodied and manifested every day in rituals and norms, and then decisions that you make around who to hire, who to fire, who to promote, who to reward.
Yep.
Effectively.
Absolutely.
And then people will see people see all those things happening around them, and then they modify their behavior or accordingly.
I actually have a matrix. It's actually one of the traction. It's part of the traction model where we actually have a matrix where we list every employee in the company and the values, and we check them off on the values quarterly, and then we say who needs to go or who needs coached, and they've got one quarter to come up above the bar on their values, or they have to go.
Yeah, makes sense.
So we take it, and when we look at raises are who's living the values. The other thing is that it needs to be a decision-making model. In that, can I use these values to make decisions? And are the decisions being made in the company reflective of these values? And if there's a disconnect, we have to fix that. So
going back to the red flags. So the red flags are like your communication's broken, your decision-making is broken, there's value in
talk to each other, the way people treat each other is broken. If you have values now and I see behavior or communication that is in conflict with those values, that's a problem. So those are the things that we look for, and we see them in probably 95% of the organizations we go into.
I mean, it is a hard problem to solve, and it's a problem that we went through a process of solving that problem here at Uscreen, right? And I think it's an easy one to not take seriously too, because it's such I don't want to say it's like a silent killer, but it's, when you're a founder, you're so busy with all this other stuff. You may not be taking the space to step back and be deliberate. Deliberate.
How did we all learn values? Values are something you put on a poster in the break room, and it's HR handles values. And when you think about values, you go, oh, put a foosball table in. They'll love it. We're like, that is not value. As my friend Jenny Thompson says, you don't have values, you have decor.
I like that. I'm going to steal that from you.
Well, you're stealing it from Jenny Thompson, so she's amazing.
You don't have values, you have decor. That's great.
So founders, I will tell you that in working with founders, fixing your values, it's weird and it's so counterintuitive, and nobody believes me until I make them do it. And I do have to make them do it. When you begin to solve your values problems, you now begin to solve all your other problems. They're like, I'm worried about my financials. I'm like, you can't fix your financials because you haven't fixed your values. You have the wrong people with the wrong behaviors, and that's why you're not making money.
Have you ever read the book, The Energy Bus?
I don't know. I've seen it. I'm not sure I've read it. I want to. Yeah, should I read it?
I would say the premise of it, it's a long book, so there's a lot in there, but I'd say I would paraphrase the basic premise as being kind of in line with what you said, which is you got to figure out what your values are and then get the right people on the bus and the right people off the bus.
Yeah.
And until you solve that, you can't really effectively do anything else.
No, you can. That's what people ask me what my secret sauce is at IWT. How am I running a multi-million-dollar company with 9 people? It's because every one of them lives their values. Like extreme ownership, they come to the table with solutions, they communicate with intent. Like these people so embody our values that I don't have to run that company. They do. And they each got, I'm going to pay out on the IWT side, I'm going to pay over $300,000 in bonuses this year to 9 people. Actually 8 people, because I'm not even counting myself. So that's how they're going to make a lot of money that's above and beyond their salaries or anything else, because they live our values every day. They blow our goals out of the water.
So you've got this values piece, right? The energy bus, you got to get the right people on the bus, the right people off the bus. I guess when you're identifying people, do you have the right people? You're looking at existing employees. If you're a growing business, you might be looking at hiring people.
You have to hire for values.
How do you hire for values?
So we actually, with my clients, and I'm actually doing this with one of my clients now, when we interview, we actually either part of one interview or a whole separate interview. We on the IWT side, and one of my other clients is doing this. We do a 30-minute interview that is not with the founder. That is nothing but a values-based interview. So we take our values and we actually structure questions around that value. And then we have a list we create interview guides. And in the interview guide, then we have a list of red flags, things that would mean maybe you're not so great with that value. So as an example, we take extreme ownership is an IWT value. And we have an interview.
Extreme ownership.
Yeah, extreme ownership. And it's really big for us. So we would ask in an interview, give me an example of a project you were on that started to go sideways and tell me what you did to bring it back online. And what we're looking for is somebody who was like, well, here's what I did. And they're showing that they went in, they solved the problem. But if they're like, well, I told my boss he needed to fix it, that's not a great example of extreme ownership. That's somebody who's like, I kind of abdicated authority.
I see. So you've got a scorecard, and a scorecard with questions, and they're mapped to the values. And then presumably you're trying to turn this into a repeatable process so that everybody who's interviewing
gets asked values-based questions. We don't so much score it as there's multiple people on the interview, but we're making decisions about are they or are they not, did they pass or not pass the values interview?
What else do you think about when hiring outside of the values? What about just hiring? How do you think about hiring the right people for competency?
We have a pretty stringent interview process. And that's one of the things that, it's funny because a lot of my founders have this narrative. I'm working with now. She's like, I'm bad at hiring. I'm like, you are not bad at hiring. Hiring is a skill. Hiring is a skill like any other skill. And most people in the creator space don't have any practice in it. Like, you wouldn't be like, I am bad at highlight. I have just never highlight. But you've just never done it.
Most people don't know what highlight is.
Right. I just completely made that up. It's actually a sport. I believe
they only play it in Miami
I'm bad
and
at
Cuba,
curling.
I think.
Curling is 100% an Olympic sport. As a thing. I'm bad at curling. Have you ever done curling before? I have a friend, she's Canadian.
Yeah.
She did curling in gym and she's really good at it. And so, but I'm not, I've never done it. So
to your point though, hiring is a skill that you can learn how to do it, practice it, and get better at it.
Right. You have to practice it. You have to get better at it. So that's one of the things I'm working with my founders on is one, we have to start with a process. Anytime you're just winging something, your results are probably going to be variable. So I have a process. We actually create what I call, and most people start in the wrong spot. We actually recommend that you start with your jobs to be done.
Okay.
And you need to get very specific on what does success look like for this role. That's the really big piece that most people miss because they're like, I'm going to hire a COO. Fantastic. How are you going to know if this COO is successful? Are you going to put him in place for 6 months and hope for the best? You need to get really clear what value are they bringing to your organization and how are you going to decide for you and them,
sure,
hey, here's what success looks like for you. And be very specific, not like, I feel like you're doing a good job. You've implemented X, Y, and Z. You've helped us grow revenue by X%. You've reduced, we have a budget in place. You've reduced errors in this process by 20%, whatever it is. Whatever is going to help you sleep at night and they'll commit to, there's your numbers. So once you have what success looks like, that needs to be a part of the interview process. And we create our interview guides. Where are we sourcing candidates? Are we just going to get them off the internet? Are we going to put them on our social media? Are we going to look at specialty job locations? Are we going to go to job fairs?
I see hiring is something that a lot of creators are struggling with. And it seems more and more creators are realizing that they have this fruitful pool of candidates within their audience.
Yes.
And you mentioned this very early on in the conversation, but have you had, how much, I mean, I was going to say, have you had success with this? But the question is, the answer is obviously yes, because you were that person. You were in the audience.
As was our latest new hire on the IWT side. He is a fan and he is an absolute rock star. We love him already.
Tell me about some of the pros and cons maybe of hiring fans from the creator's audience.
Hiring fans I don't know that I have ever found a downside in hiring a fan. I mean, obviously, the one thing I am cautious about is making sure that they're truly qualified. The one thing that we do get is a lot of fans apply only because they want to work for the brand. Yeah. So we do have to very carefully say, hey, we love you and you're awesome. And you do want to handle them gently so you don't lose them as fans. So that's the other thing is you need to speak to them carefully.
The turn down process can be fraught with a little bit of risk.
Yeah. So you need to be thoughtful. You don't want to lose them as fans.
And it probably, not just the turn down, but it probably puts a lot more pressure on the overall candidate experience, even the upfront experience.
Well, I feel like your overall candidate experience should be absolutely frigging amazing anyway. Yeah. You owe it to yourself. You're representing your brand. And I think a lot of people forget this. People assume, and this is the interview process I went through, by the way, like, oh, we're the brand. We're awesome. We're famous. You're lucky to get to interview with us. So we are in the driver's seat and we don't actually have to treat you that well. And that is a terrible experience for your candidates. And in this market, you are fighting for the best talent. You need to create an absolutely amazing experience for your candidates. You need to treat them like gold. And remember, you are fighting for the absolute best talent on the market. And however you treat them in the interview process, once they're hired, you're setting the table now for how you expect them to act and your values once they join the organization. If you treat them like crap up front, they're going to believe that's how they act once they start.
And so it sounds like you would say then maybe that the cons of hiring from your audience the risks can largely be mitigated by just running a good hiring process.
Yeah. If you have a good hiring process, your audience is absolutely the best place to hire from if you can find someone qualified. The key is you have to make sure they're qualified.
Yeah. They got to pass they have to pass the values test. They have to pass the competency test.
Yes.
Assuming they do, it's all
my interview process is we do an initial, are you a serial killer interview? Basically that's just the sniff test. And that's usually somebody on the team is like, can you, are you, articulate? Do you meet or, are you this tall to ride the rod? Do you meet the minimum qualifications? Are you a serial killer wanted in 7 states? Like that would exclude you. The second interview is generally with the hiring manager or the team, depending. If you pass the second, that's where we really go deep into, here's what success looks like in the role. Here are very specific questions. We're really digging deep into the competency for the role. If they pass that, we will give them a test project. We always do some kind of test project. It's small. It's not anything elaborate, but we want to actually see a sample of their work as it pertains to the job and to give them a little bit of a chance of like, here's the type of work you would be working on. And then in the last interview, we will typically review or ask questions about their test project as well as test for values.
I see. Do you ever do like contract to full-time?
We do.
Hiring type things?
We do that quite often. That's how our community manager Olivia on the IWT side is an absolute rock star. She is amazing. And we picked her up as like, well, I think we got her off Upwork, maybe. We were like, well, she can be a contractor. Like we had really low expectations. We were like, she has a pulse. She'll be fine. We just wanted her to do some like really administrative stuff. She is a full-time hire running that program now. Every time I talk to her, she's like, I got a new idea. I was like, you're a genius. Please make that happen. I cannot like tell you how valuable you are.
Yeah. I like that baseline. You should always test people on competency, in my opinion, as part of the interview process. But some of the best hires I've made personally have been part-time sort of transition to full-time, because it's so hard to replace that experience of actually working together over more prolonged periods.
Right.
To really know what somebody's about.
It is ideal. Sometimes you don't have that luxury because the candidates that you want, like for instance, if you're trying to hire a permanent COO, you typically aren't going to get.
The market may not bear it.
Yeah. Well, you don't find a lot of like contract COOs,
right?
Except for fractionals, and you're probably not going to flip them into a perm. So it really is are there part-time or are there contract people in that role who would become perm? In some cases, there just aren't.
Yeah.
So it depends. Now, I would say I'm also a hire fast, fire fast person. So when I do hire somebody, I give them a very clear, and all of my teams do, here is your success plan for your first 90 days.
Mm-hmm.
And here's what success looks like with some very specific markers. So about 30 days, you should have accomplished X, Y, and Z. And we set it together. It's not just dictated.
Right.
By 60 days, you should have done X, Y, and Z. And by 90 days, you should have X, Y, and Z. And if they're not hitting those kind of like growth markers, then you have to go. We want to make it very clear so it's not ambiguous.
So you've got a new candidate, they've started, and you set up this like 30, 60, 90-day plan. Maybe some things are going according to plan, maybe some aren't. How do you go about giving feedback?
Very directly. My feedback is very direct. I'm very big on radical candor, and feedback is very easy. People hate giving feedback because they get real oogie about like, I don't want to hurt people's feelings. And like,
how are creators at giving feedback? Do you find they're good at it?
Oh God, no, they hate it because they don't want to hurt people's feelings. Creators are at heart generally very kind people. Most of them are just very kind. They also, because they're creators, they know how much it hurts when somebody like insults your work. Like, this copy is trash. This video is terrible. Like it hurts.
Yeah. So
here's the way around that. When you start up front, this is my secret advice to everyone. It's not a secret, but this takes all the pain out of it. When you start up front for a project, for a job, for a task, everything, just start with the agreement of what does success look like. So if I say, Matt, this podcast episode needs to be X minutes long, you need to cover the following 3 topics, and you need to make sure that by the end, we've, said the following 3 phrases. Like, that's success for this podcast. Do you agree? And you
have this pre-negotiated sort of a verbal contract, essentially, or mutual understanding of like, this is what success looks like. And then it's very black and white, presumably.
And we write it down. We write it down just so there's no confusion. We go, we cool? Like, and it doesn't have to be complicated. We're like, we cool? We agree? Great. So now when we're talking about it, I don't go, Matt, you did a bad job. This isn't good. I say, we're now just reviewing the facts. I'm not telling you anything. I'm like, Matt, did this happen? And you go, well, I got bullet point number 1, but I didn't get 2 and 3. And I'm like, well, like, we needed all 3. So let's talk about it. Like, what happened? Why didn't we get 2 and 3? Is there a plan to fix it for the future? And we're going to have that conversation a couple times. And if not, it's like, Matt, like, look, we keep agreeing on what success looks like. What do you like? I've never fired anybody. I just give you a chance. You've basically fired yourself because I'm like, look, you're not hitting these success criteria and we keep agreeing on them. What would you do?
Are there any other like coaching tips you would give to creators who really struggle with the feedback thing? Either giving feedback or receiving it?
I will say this. People really, really, really want feedback. They really do. And what they want is frequent feedback. No one likes to be ambushed by feedback. That's why people hate end of the year reviews, because
Yep.
at the end of the year, it's like, well, Nancy, it turns out you've done a terrible job. All your assignments were late. Your creative was crap. Your copy was and it's like, what? Like, it's Christmas and you're just telling me I did a bad
Why didn't you tell
job?
me this
Like,
6 months ago?
yeah. So people like really frequent in the moment feedback. And again, if you started with what success looks like, it's not this big to do. It's, hey, and it doesn't, and the other thing is it doesn't have to be, and if it's frequent, both positive and negative, it's not this big thing. You can be like, you know what? I didn't like today's email quite as much as yesterday's. I feel like the headline was a little weak. Like, if I'm giving you feedback kind of every day, it's not a big deal. But
Yeah,
if
the
I
problem is
just,
if you wait, it really builds up, doesn't it? Because then you're not
right,
given one piece of feedback in the moment, you're given 15
20,
at once.
right. Now it's a lot. Now if I go, hey, let me tell you about, let's review your last 20 emails. This one was bad. This one was all right. The headline here was, I didn't like this. The first 3 paragraphs here weren't any good. Like, oh my God, that's a lot. But if I'm just like, yeah, I didn't love today's headline. Can we work on that? Yeah, not a problem. That's totally cool. So frequency matters. And then just, and don't fluff it up. The whole sandwich thing that people like, I have to say something nice, and I can say
No,
something
yeah.
mean.
I don't know
Then
why
I
they
can,
taught us that in elementary school because it's BS. It's not the
it's
best way to
crap.
do it.
And people know it. Everybody knows it now. You're not fooling anyone. Like, what people want is a simple, clear, direct statement of what to improve. They simply want clear direction. Every employee wants to do well. So if you give them clear direction, today's email wasn't as strong as I would have liked. I think the first paragraph could be better, and the headline wasn't that great. That's not a personal judgment. That's just direct feedback.
Yeah, you're focused on you're being solutions oriented. I think is
And it's specific. Be specific as well when you give positive feedback, as opposed to saying, Matt, great job. You say, Matt, this proposal was fantastic. I think the way that you presented your thoughts was super clear. I love the way that you came to your conclusion and summarized your thoughts at the end. This makes it really easy for me to make a fast decision. Nice work.
I hear over and over again that managing creative types, which may be a creator or may not be, maybe a creative type might be an editor perhaps, or a thumbnail designer, is different than managing other types of roles. And first of all, I don't know how much I agree with that. I will say I don't have a huge amount of experience managing creatives myself, so my judgment may be off here. But I imagine you've managed a lot of creatives. What's your take on this?
I think it's both things for sure. I think it's a bit of a narrative that they're these special, they wear berets and, I have in the creative arts. Like, it's not quite that extreme. It is a bit different in that typically creatives there are some differences in how they communicate, and that they're not facts and figures people as far as like numbers. Like, if you hit a creative and you're like, hey, let's run through this a very long and confusing spreadsheet of numbers and we'll talk about, like,
Their eyes will
pretty
glaze
much
over.
creatives are going to shut down. They're just like, no, like, don't, please stop with the numbers. But a lot of people are like that. Like, that's not just creatives. Creatives tend to be highly verbal. So if you're talking to them, giving them analogies and comparisons and metaphors to convey ideas really helps them understand a concept. So if you're like, hey, like, I feel like we need to be more robust in the visual images on the sales copy. Go look at X, Y, and Z. I love the way that it's so modern. Like, it makes you feel like you're in a grassy field or a, Scandinavian coffee house. Like, they do well with images and words,
Sure.
as opposed to saying, like, I want you to use a black and white color palette and make sure that you're only using images that have, X, Y, and Z in it. Giving them the emotional tenor of stuff really helps.
Okay.
And then one thing that I've found that Ramit taught me when talking to anybody that's super valuable, but for creatives in particular, is when giving feedback, how do you want them to feel? And not just presentations, feedback. How do you want them to feel? Don't just think about what do you want them to do. How do you want them to feel? Select your words and your tone and your, do I want you to feel like you just got a beat down and you're afraid? Or do I want you to feel like, okay, I got this, I can do it, but I just need to make some changes in what I'm doing?
Yeah, I guess part of the narrative, I think, maybe something that underlies that narrative of managing creatives differently. I think there's an implication that it's easier to hurt their feelings. I'm sort of the opinion that I think everybody needs feedback crafted the right way. And
Yeah. Like as an operator, if I give you a budget plan on a spreadsheet and you tell me, like, you start picking at it, like, you hurt my feeling. I'm like, I worked so hard on this and you're giving me criticism.
Yeah.
I don't think it's specific to creatives. I think it really applies to anybody. So, I think to your point, craft your feedback to whoever you're talking to. I don't lump my employees into the creatives and the non-creatives, and I can just be like, hey, non-creatives, that sucked, do it different. Yeah. Creatives, let me pet you and hold your little hands.
Yeah. To some degree, it could be interpreted as a little pedantic,
especially if you've ever managed IT people. Because if you want to make people mad, criticize somebody's code. Like,
yeah,
true. Yeah, tell somebody their code's wrong. Like developers, like, you want to talk about people that get mad. They're like, that is not like, that code is fine.
We've talked a lot about giving feedback, but how do you coach people on receiving feedback?
That's hard for everybody. And really it depends on how it's given, because I've gotten feedback that was great. And I've gotten feedback that was terrible. And when somebody gives you feedback that's really bad, it's hard to be graceful about it.
Sure.
So, one thing that we did learn at Cigna that I did like was a phrase that was assume positive intent. Mm-hmm. So, assume positive intent, which is whoever's giving you feedback, assume it's coming from a well-intentioned place as a starting. No matter how badly it's given, give them the credit that they may not be good at giving feedback. So assume intent. Also remember that you don't have to take feedback. This whole feedback's a gift. Like, yeah. Someone is going to, my advice to anybody taking feedback is sit with it. Meditation has really changed my life and really helped me. Sit with feedback as somebody gives it to you. You are under no obligation to act on it.
Yeah.
You are under no obligation to respond. And a fine answer, if you just are like blindsided and you're just mad and this is terrible. Like, it is fine to say, I really appreciate you telling me that. Let me sit with that and give it some thought. And I'd like to come back with you after I've had some time to think about it. I'd like to come back to you with some thoughts.
I love that.
That is perfectly fine to say, as opposed to going, what you shouldn't do, even if you're morally right. Don't argue. Don't get mad. Only because it puts you in a place of being on the defensive. And that's just not good for you professionally. It makes you sad and upset. The best thing you can do is just not engage.
You hit on, by the way, I love that. And I think you kind of hit on the Netflix 4A framework a little bit. And that, the second 2 A's, which are about receiving, are basically, to summarize, I think it's like 1A is appreciate the feedback. So assume good intent, appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. I don't have to appreciate it, but I am going to take it professionally.
And then the second one is accept or reject. Or I guess that's technically the fourth A of the 4, but it's like, you're under no obligation to, like, people will give you feedback all the time that may not actually be accurate or useful. And so you have to take that feedback in, digest it, take the parts of it that you think make sense, right, and reject the ones that don't.
And that is why it's totally fine to say, it's hard because the feedback generally that you get pissed off at is generally because it did strike a nerve.
Sure.
So that's why it's like, let me just sit with this for a minute. The other thing from meditation that's actually really helpful, it's not feedback per se, but if you feel yourself getting angry or defensive or wanting to defend, actually just breathe. First of all, take a very deep breath. And now, if you can, this takes a lot of presence to do. Try to check in with your body. Actually ask yourself physically, what am I feeling? Is my chest tight? Is my stomach upset? Are my shoulders hunched? Am I gritting my teeth? You don't need to do anything about it, but it takes you a little bit out of that moment. Like it changes your mindset just enough to be like, oh wow, like my body is mad. Like I can let me be conscious of what's going on. And then I can go, okay, take a breath. I can just decide not to do this right now.
It's kind of unfortunate that we evolved as humans with such a deep fear of shunning from the group. I mean, it makes sense why evolutionarily why we evolved that way, but it's such a bummer. It's such a shame because, we can get feedback from a peer that somehow strikes this autonomous nervous system.
Yeah.
Nerve,
it does.
right?
It
and
makes
sends
your
us
nervous
into this.
Yeah, but the flip side is that's kind of the, oh my God, this is feedback that's freaking me out. Sometimes you get really positive, useful feedback. And the older I get, the more I kind of look at it that way, that I'm like, oh, okay. And Ramit gives really good feedback. He's good at doing it. And even like we have a relationship now where I can go, okay, let me think about that for a second. And I'm like, I think your first point is really strong. I want to think about how I can incorporate that and make some changes around that. I'm not sure I disagree with your second point, or I'm not sure I agree with your second point. I want to think about that some more. I'm not sure that I totally agree, but let's discuss that on our next call. Yeah. But it's something that you have choices on, but sometimes like external people may give you some great insights. Sometimes you're just too close.
Yeah. All the time.
And I love my leadership team. My leadership team is great because we're not even nice to each other anymore. They're like, that idea was terrible. Like that idea was so bad. Like, I can't even believe you thought of that. And I was like, that really was terrible. Like that was actually hard. So, sometimes it can just be like, no, that's terrible. And you can be like, yeah, okay, that was bad.
Yeah. I definitely think giving feedback is a skill that can be practiced. And I also think that receiving feedback can be a skill that you can practice too and get a lot better at. And I always encourage people, the more you ask for feedback, the more repetitions you get, the faster you get better at it. And it's a skill that pays off so well.
It is
in really any discipline.
Career hack, because if you're bad at receiving feedback, people will stop giving it to you, and you are now plateaued at wherever you are. You can't learn because you're not. Here's one of my favorite ways to get feedback that's not quite so, it's weird sometimes to just be like, will you give me some feedback on my performance? People are like, you're cool. But it's an EOS trick. At the end of every meeting, we will ask on a scale of 1 to 10, how effective was this meeting? And we ask everybody to rate. But this is really useful in a lot of other areas. So we can say like, hey, for my participation on this project, how would you rate me on a scale of 1 to 10? And if you say 8, great, that's amazing. What would have moved me closer to a 10? So now I'm getting some constructive feedback. It's not like you were terrible. Now I'm just looking for what would make me better. This is positive. It's not you were bad. This would make you better. I can hear it. You can say it, and it's not awkward for either of us.
I love that. I'll probably ask you for feedback on this podcast after we're done.
I'm totally going to ask you. How was I on a scale of 1 to 10?
Well, we try to wrap these conversations up with 1 to 2 pieces of tangible advice for our audience. And our audience is, typically creators and creator COOs in various points in their journey. If you're a creator writing the job description for a creator COO, what would be the 2 or 3 big points you would want to make in the JD?
Ooh, well, everybody's a little different, and all creators have different skills. Based on what I see most often, if I were a creator and I'm a creative creator, I'm a visionary, I would be looking for somebody that can take over financial management, working with an accounting team. I don't have to be an accountant, but I need somebody that can create and manage budgets, actuals, financials, make sure we are making money and cash is coming in and we are on track to meet our goals.
Mm-hmm.
I would also want somebody that can run the day-to-day operations, because probably I hate doing it and I'm also bad. So it's managing people and leadership.
Okay.
And then really creating replicable processes that scale.
I love that advice.
Those would be my biggies. Those would be the big 3, because those are really the big gaps that I see that most creators either hate or are not so great at.
I suspect you might get a bunch of creators asking you to help them write their JD after that advice.
I will actually, you know what? I have my standard kind of hiring package. If you hit me up, we can put one in the podcast link. So
cool. And then last question for you. What's your advice for creators who are looking to find their operating partner? Where should they look?
There are a lot of great places to look. The best place to look is usually within your own network. So ask the people you know, ask other creators, depending on what software platform you're on. Like, for example, I know a lot of people, the gang at ConvertKit, Nathan at ConvertKit. He's amazing and he knows a lot of people in the ops space. I would 100% hit up the ConvertKit team. I send a lot of my people to them. I'm happy to make recommendations. You can look up fractional COO. If you're looking for integrators, if you go for, which is similar, if you're running an EOS model, you can actually go to EOS Worldwide, and they will make integrator recommendations.
Okay.
But really networking, I mean, obviously you can look on job boards and stuff as well, but networking is really the best way.
Network and tap some trusted partners who have some expertise.
Tap the people you know, tap trusted partners, go to other people in your space and ask them what they're doing or if they know anybody, because somebody always knows somebody. Any
other parting words of advice for the audience?
No, other than I have a lot of workbooks and stuff that I'm happy to share. I love creators and I want to see them succeed. I want to see all these creators become $1 million bootstrapped companies with a 20% profit margin. Be nice to yourselves and keep doing what you're doing, because the world needs more of it. So thank you for having me. This is so much fun.
Thanks for being here, Gretchen. I appreciate your time and I hope we do it again soon.
I'd love to.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Creator COO. If you found this valuable, you can subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. Also, please consider giving us a rating and a review, as this helps other creators and creator COOs like you to find the podcast. This episode was produced by Rebecca Donovan at Uscreen with support from the team at Share Your Genius. It was edited by Chandler Chappell with artwork design by Spencer Marsh. I'm Matt Estes, and you've been listening to The Creator COO. See you next time.